In September of the year 9 AD, deep inside a dense, rain-soaked forest in what is now northwestern Germany, 3 of Rome's finest legions marched into a trap so complete, so devastating, that when the news reached the Emperor Augustus in Rome, ancient sources describe him repeatedly striking his head against a door, crying out a single anguished phrase that would echo through Roman history for centuries. Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions. Those legions never came back. Roughly 20,000 Roman soldiers, along with their commander, were annihilated over the course of 3 brutal days, and the man responsible for orchestrating their destruction was not a foreign warlord Rome had underestimated from a distance. He was a man Rome had trained, trusted, and even made a citizen. This is the story of Arminius, the Roman-trained officer who turned against the empire that made him, and the catastrophe at the Teutoburg Forest that permanently altered the course of European history. To understand how this betrayal became possible, we have to go back roughly 2 decades earlier, to a Rome in the middle of an ambitious, sustained campaign to push its imperial frontier deep into Germanic territory east of the Rhine River. As part of the standard Roman practice of securing alliances with conquered or allied peoples, the sons of Germanic nobility were frequently taken as hostages or sent for military training within the Roman system, both as a guarantee of their tribe's loyalty and as a means of raising a new generation of local leaders who would think and fight like Romans. Arminius, born around 18 BC as the son of Segimerus, a chieftain of the Cherusei tribe, was one such young noble absorbed into this system, and by his early adulthood he had risen impressively within Roman military ranks, commanding auxiliary troops, earning Roman citizenship, and even attaining the status of a Roman knight, an equestrian rank reserved for men of genuine standing and trust within Roman society. Arminius fought alongside Roman legions, likely gaining first-hand experience of Roman tactics, discipline, logistics, and command structure that few outsiders were ever permitted to observe so closely, knowledge that would later prove catastrophic in the hands of an enemy. By 7 AD, the Roman governor of the region, Publius Quintilius Varus, a man with a background more in administration and provincial governance than in frontier warfare, had been assigned to oversee the newly claimed Germanic territories east of the Rhine, tasked with the ambitious project of transforming this recently subdued frontier into a fully integrated Roman province, complete with Roman law, Roman taxation, and Roman administrative structures. Varus, according to the Roman historian Tacitus and other ancient sources, approached this task with a fatal degree of overconfidence, treating the Germanic tribes less like a recently conquered population still simmering with resentment, and more like an already pacified province ready for full Roman governance, seemingly unaware of, or unwilling to fully credit, the depth of resistance quietly building against Roman rule beneath the surface of apparent cooperation. Arminius, serving as one of Varus's trusted advisors and commanders of Germanic auxiliary troops, used this position of trust to begin secretly organizing a coalition of Germanic tribes willing to rise up against Roman control, all while continuing to present himself to Varus as a loyal and valuable Roman ally, a dual role he maintained with remarkable and ultimately devastating discipline. According to Roman accounts, a rival Germanic chieftain named Segestes, who harbored personal grievances against Arminius and remained genuinely loyal to Rome, attempted to warn Varus directly that Arminius was secretly plotting rebellion, reportedly even urging Varus to arrest Arminius and his fellow conspirators before matters escalated further. But Varus, trusting Arminius's polished Roman demeanor and years of demonstrated service, dismissed these warnings as little more than tribal rivalry and personal grudge, a decision that would prove fatal for the 3 legions under his command. In the autumn of 9 AD, as Varus was leading his forces, roughly the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions along with auxiliary troops and a substantial number of camp followers, from their summer quarters back toward winter garrison positions along the Rhine, Arminius informed him of a supposed local uprising requiring immediate attention, convincing Varus to divert his march route through unfamiliar, difficult terrain rather than following the established, more defensible roads his legions typically used. Trusting his advisor completely, Varus agreed, and the Roman column, stretched out over what ancient sources suggest may have extended for several miles due to the difficult terrain, heavy baggage train, and accompanying civilians, entered the dense woodland and hilly terrain of the region, now generally identified with the Teutoburg Forest, a landscape of narrow paths, thick vegetation, and treacherous, waterlogged ground entirely unsuited to the traditional Roman fighting formation that had made their legions so effective on open battlefields across the empire. Arminius, having already departed the column under the pretext of gathering allied reinforcements, was in fact leading those very forces into position, coordinating a coalition of Germanic tribes, including his own Charusai, along with allied groups such as the Bructeri, Marsi, and Chatti, who now lay in ambush along the Roman line of march. As the exhausted, strung-out Roman column pushed deeper into the forest under worsening weather, with ancient sources describing persistent, heavy rain turning the narrow paths to mud and further slowing their progress, the Germanic coalition launched their attack, striking repeatedly at the vulnerable, elongated Roman formation from the surrounding forest cover. Using hit-and-run tactics perfectly suited to the terrain and devastatingly effective against legions unable to form their standard, disciplined battle lines in such cramped and difficult conditions. The assault unfolded not as a single decisive battle, but as a brutal, sustained ordeal stretching across roughly 3 days, with the surviving Roman forces attempting repeatedly to fight their way through hostile terrain towards safety, constructing makeshift fortified camps each night in a desperate effort to regroup, only to be attacked again and again as they resumed their march, their numbers steadily thinning under continuous pressure, exhaustion, and the psychological terror of an enemy that seemed to strike from everywhere within the surrounding forest, and then vanish before an organized counterattack could be mounted. By the battle's final stages, with his forces effectively surrounded, his supply situation collapsing, and further resistance clearly futile, Varus made the decision, in keeping with Roman tradition for a defeated commander facing capture, to take his own life by falling on his sword rather than be taken alive, and several of his senior officers reportedly followed his example in the battle's final hours. Of the roughly 20,000 Romans who had marched into the forest, the overwhelming majority were killed outright in the fighting, while a smaller number were reportedly taken captive, with ancient sources describing captured Roman officers subjected to ritual execution, and the 3 legions' eagle standards, sacred symbols central to Roman military identity and pride, were seized as trophies by the victorious Germanic coalition, a humiliation so severe that all 3 legion numbers, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were permanently retired from Roman military service afterward, never reconstituted or reused for the remainder of the empire's history, a mark of institutional trauma virtually unmatched elsewhere in the Roman record. When word of the disaster reached Emperor Augustus in Rome, the reaction, as recorded by the Roman historian Suetonius, was one of profound personal grief and genuine strategic alarm, with Augustus reportedly refusing to shave or cut his hair for months afterward in mourning, and expressing serious fear that Arminius's coalition might press their advantage and push into Roman territory west of the Rhine itself. In the years that followed, Rome did launch a series of major punitive campaigns back into Germanic territory, most notably under the general Germanicus, adopted son of the future Emperor Tiberius, whose forces succeeded in recovering 2 of the 3 lost legionary eagles and inflicting significant retaliatory damage on Arminius's coalition in several hard-fought engagements. Yet despite these partial successes and the temporary reassertion of Roman military presence in the region, Rome ultimately made the strategic decision to permanently abandon its earlier ambition of directly annexing and administering Germanic territory east of the Rhine as a formal province, instead settling into a long-term policy of maintaining the Rhine River itself as the empire's practical northeastern frontier, a boundary that would remain remarkably stable for the better part of the following 4 centuries. Arminius himself did not enjoy a long or entirely triumphant aftermath to his historic victory. Ancient sources, principally the Roman historian Tacitus, describe him becoming increasingly entangled in power struggles among the various Germanic tribes, and even within his own Charusai leadership in the years following his triumph, eventually being assassinated around 21 AD, reportedly by rival kinsmen wary of his growing ambition and influence, dying at roughly the age of 37, having lived barely a dozen years beyond the battle that made his name immortal in Roman and later European historical memory. What makes the story of Arminius and the Teutoburg Forest so enduringly remarkable, beyond the sheer scale of the military catastrophe itself, is the deeply personal nature of the betrayal at its center. This was not simply a case of Rome underestimating a foreign enemy from a safe, comfortable distance, but of an empire placing genuine trust, military rank, citizenship, and operational command directly into the hands of a man who had been deliberately trained and educated within its own system, only to have that very knowledge and trust turned back against it with devastating precision. Centuries later, as European nationalism rose sharply during the 18th and 19th centuries, Arminius, increasingly referred to by the Germanized form of his name, Hermann, was reimagined and celebrated as a foundational national hero and symbol of Germanic resistance to foreign domination. Memorialized most famously in the towering Hermannsdenkmal monument completed in 1875 near the town of Detmold, close to the presumed site of the battle itself, a monument that still stands today as one of the most visible reminders of just how deeply this 2,000-year-old ambush continues to echo through European historical memory. Looking back at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest today, historians widely regard it as one of the most consequential military defeats in Roman history, not for the immediate scale of Roman territorial loss alone, but for the profound and lasting strategic caution it instilled regarding further expansion into Germanic Europe, effectively drawing a boundary line along the Rhine that would help shape the cultural, linguistic, and political development of the European continent for the next 2,000 years, all traceable back to the calculated, patient betrayal of a single trusted Roman officer who used the empire's own training and the empire's own misplaced confidence to erase 3 of its legions in a rain-soaked forest and to ensure that Rome's ambitions east of the Rhine would never fully recover.